And to follow that up, we'll also have a second session this month on the 20th. So if you folks, have some peers who weren't able to attend today, then you could send them the registration link for the next session. That should be in the original email that was sent out for this session, but we'll probably send a reminder maybe today or tomorrow, and then they'll get that email out where the registration link will be. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get started. On the call with me, I've got my buddy here, Rudy. He's also on the CSM team along with me. He'll be helping us today field some questions and things like that. Keep me on track. Sometimes I get sidetracked and jump to a different topic. There's a lot to cover, but today we'll kind of cover the faculty and student experience within the Apporto platform. And if we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll try and cover some of the Cyberlab possibilities that we have, and then cover some Q&A. That's not to say that you can't go ahead and raise your hand or ask a question in chat. Rudy will typically check that out and have me answer the question live. So don't feel shy to ask questions. Okay, on the agenda today, I'm going to cover logging into the platform, what is Apporto, what do we do, things like that. I'll talk about what you'll see in what we call the App Store, and then I'll cover a good chunk of the session talking about file handling and how moving files in and out of our environment works, and also what are the recovery possibilities within how files are handled. Then we'll also cover the faculty features where we will show virtual classroom and the presenter mode. Those are features that allow you to see your student screens within one page in little thumbnails, and also how you can present your screen to their sessions, to your student sessions as well, if you want them to follow along on screen to what you're doing. Also, we'll cover a little bit what our LMS integrations, so talking about Canvas and things like that, D2L, Blackboard, etc., and how our platform can be enabled within the LMS and how it can be accessed or attached to your LMS. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Cyberlabs, which I'll show. It's kind of a little more geared towards computer science and IT infrastructure and things like that, or info security types of classes or cybersecurity types of classes. So, but it's a pretty neat solution. So we'll cover some of those items. And then at the bottom, if you guys need any help with anything, feel free to email support or success@apporto.com. Success@apporto.com is mostly myself and Rudy, but that, if you have any questions or if you need any help with your existing setup, or if you're new and you don't have a setup yet and you just have questions general, you can shoot those emails over to us as well. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will pull up a different screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. So I'll be showing 2 screens here in a second, but for the first part of it, what I'll do is I'll show just one big screen, and then eventually I'll split my screen in half to show the student perspective, and I'll show the faculty perspective. Okay, let me resume that. Okay, so what we have here is a landing page. In this case, this is our quick little demo instance, but if you guys are an existing customer, then you'll have an instance similar to this where you'll have a logo on the right, maybe your university or school logo here at the top left. And to access the environment, first of all, Apporto is a device agnostic virtual PC streaming provider. Essentially, we're kind of a mix between software as a service and desktop as a service. And so our platform runs strictly off of a browser. In this case, I'm using Chrome, but we support Firefox and Edge, or Safari and things like that. So pretty much any browser that is HTML5 capable, that's all you need to access Apporto. And that makes it a device agnostic approach in the sense that you can open this up on an iPad or an iPhone, Android tablet, Chromebook, or maybe a Linux operating system, and so forth. And so you can access this environment essentially from any device that has an internet connection and a newer browser. Internet Explorer is something we don't support, but hopefully nobody's using that anymore. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and log in with my student account here. I'll try to prove I'm not a robot. I think that's a tractor. Okay. So what we're seeing here, I'm a student that just logged into this instance, and what we're seeing here is essentially a collection of environments that users in your organization might have access to. And the items that we see here are kind of dependent on what the university or school has subscribed to within our platform. So in this case, we have this Windows desktop, or we have some isolated applications like Visio or SolidWorks. We also have other types of environments here, like our Cyberlab, which runs on Linux, or maybe we have a virtual Mac desktop here and things like that. And so essentially what this is a collection of environments or applications that users have access to based on some sort of conditional access rules. Those rules could be defined by single sign-on. Those rules could be defined by where things are published within your LMS. Those rules could be defined by just manually by your system's admin who might have configured certain environments with certain groups. So that's really all dependent on where the student is within the Apporto platform in terms of what group they belong to, or maybe this is just a collection of everything that the university wants their users to see. And so the point I'm trying to drive at here is that each of these environments could be specifically published to a certain department, a certain group, a certain class, or a certain set of students with a few faculty. So that's kind of what this is all about. And from a faculty perspective, there will be a couple of other icons here that will show up, and I'll cover those later. So accessing the environment, maybe connecting to a desktop. So this would be clicking on the launch button here, and if the user has multiple monitors, they could drop down this little arrow here and click on multi-monitor mode. And what this will do is it'll open up the same tab that will open up here when I click on launch, and essentially gives me a desktop connection. Except that if I launch in multi-monitor mode, I'll have an extra button right here called A and B, and that will activate a second tab, which will extend the view of that monitor to another tab, and I could take that tab and move it to my secondary monitor on the right, and essentially I'll have two separate monitors, one on the left, one on the right, and so we could support multi-monitor mode that way. So users who log in for the first time, they'll see kind of like a little fly-through tutorial here. It'll kind of highlight each of these icons and talk about what they are. So just a first-time login will have that experience. There'll be a little tutorial here that covers all these buttons, but I'm going to go through these features anyway. So the first one here is full screen mode. Right now, if I expand my screen share a little bit, you'll see that I have two taskbars. The first one here is my actual taskbar on the computer that I'm using, right? And then the second taskbar is the one that's within the virtual PC session. So I've got my my browser here, and I've got my taskbar. So if I take this button and toggle the full screen mode, that's going to go ahead and expand that full. And at this point, we'll have a 1:1 pixel ratio. So that means that now I'm in full screen mode. I'm getting, in this case, 1080p connection here to the virtual environment and my physical box here. So I've got a 1:1 ratio of my actual resolution here, which is pretty neat. And so in full screen mode, it's important to know that commands like multi keyboard shortcuts and combinations, those are captured fully when you're in full screen mode. So things like Alt-Tab or Alt-Windows, in this case I have nothing open, but if I had some stuff open here, and I do the Windows Tab key, you could see that that's passing that. If you're using some other applications like AutoCAD or something like that, then multiple shortcuts or key combinations or SolidWorks, those will be passed and captured fully. So if you have to do Control Shift F6 and so forth, all of that will be captured. Now, if you're using a Mac to connect to, in this case, a Windows machine like I am here, same rules apply, except that you have to remember that Mac keyboards have a couple different buttons on there, like Command and Control. I guess Control is technically on the PC keyboard as well. So some of those shortcuts will map a little bit differently. For example, to copy and paste within a Windows environment, it's Control C, Control V. Whereas I think in the Mac environment, it's Command. So you have to remember that if you're using a Mac and you're copying something from maybe text or an image from your physical Mac into the virtual environment, you would do Command C, and then you would have to do Control V within the virtual desktop. So there's some of those nuances there when you're kind of cross-platform connecting. Okay. So then to escape from the full screen mode, there's a little X that shows up at the top. So you could do that to get out of that mode. So I'm going to go ahead and back into the regular mode here. Okay, and then things like copying files to and from, we've got these buttons here. So if I click on File Upload, that'll bring up my File Explorer. And by default, anything that you select there after you click OK to upload will be uploaded to the virtual desktop here. That's just the default location. If you want to upload things or move things over to your documents folder, for example, or your downloads folder, you just kind of copy it from your desktop to wherever you need. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about our kind of like redirected containerized profiles and this U drive here and things like that. I'll explain what that is. So each user by default within the Apporto platform gets 10 gigabytes of persistent storage, and that can be increased or decreased by your sysadmin who's in charge of like the Apporto environment. So if a certain group needed more, for example, 25 gigs or 30 gigs, somebody could set that limitation and expand that storage capacity for that class. Or if they needed to shrink that, they could do that as well. So they could set those limits. Now, another thing that we support, another feature that we have is you can kind of drag and drop files into your virtual desktop. So from my physical machine, I'm going to go ahead and drag this text document. Looks like I did that before. So it should make a copy just right into the virtual environment. And that'll go ahead and upload it to the desktop in a second here. In this case, it found that we already have something with the same name. I'll say keep both, and that'll go ahead and make a copy there. So drag and drop is supported, which is nice. If you want to download files out of the virtual environment to your physical machine, you can click on this download button here. And from there, you can browse your redirected, your containerized persistent profile area. So in this case, if I want to download the text documents that I just uploaded, or if I want to back up a step and go to my documents folder or downloads folder from the virtual PC, I could do that as well. You just double click there, find the file you want, and then you can click on download. So that's going to download that file to the download section of the browser. So on your file system, you have a downloads folder that's usually set as the default location for web browsers, but everybody can modify those on their own machines. So just keep in mind that it just goes to the download section. Okay, let me go ahead and delete these guys. That brings me to the file handling. I'll talk a little bit about these features in a second. But since we're on that topic of file handling, we do have a virtual recycle bin, right? This is just like using any Windows PC. So if I hit the delete key, that should move those there. So, but it's because it's the same thing as a real desktop. Um, if a student says shift delete, that's going to permanently delete that. So now we have a situation where those files are gone forever and things like that. And so we do have a feature called shadow copies. So I'll talk a little bit about how to recover files that may have been deleted at a certain point in time. So let me talk a little bit about that now. So here we have this folder that I created, I think, several weeks ago. So if I right-click on this folder on my desktop, go to Properties, I have the section here called Previous Versions, and these are multiple copies that have been created hourly over time, specifically for this folder. And so we can kind of go back here and see that there's several hourly backups of this folder dating back almost a full month now. And so what I'm getting at is, if a student wanted to find, if a user wanted to find a file version or a version of the file from previous time, maybe they overwrote some of these files or deleted them, they could do that. They could either restore the entire parent folder, or they could browse within that backup, find what they need, and then make and copy it back. And so that's what we have here, is an older version of these files. And at some point, I think somewhere way back there would be a version where I don't have those files, or maybe I don't have one of those files. And so it's a pretty neat feature. The same thing can be done for the other redirected containerized areas that we have. So we containerize and redirect desktop, downloads, and documents. These three areas are persistent to each user. So maybe within the documents, we could just right-click on that and click on properties, and the same thing. We'll see some versions of that. Or maybe the actual desktop folder itself, we can right-click on that, click on properties, and click on previous versions, and we can see versions of that as well. So it's a pretty neat feature there. And this, you can drill down into multiple subfolders. So wherever you have any type of directories within these three areas, you could find these hourly backups. So it's a really good feature. Let me talk a little bit about the U drive here. So what the U drive is essentially, it's a symbolic link back to the documents folder. So what this is, if I click on documents here, we'll see the same contents as we see here. And so because we use profile containerization and things like that, some applications will see that profile as a network resource. It might think it's like a UNC path, porto.com/ et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so certain applications, usually old, like legacy apps, might not like that redirection. And so we created the U drive for that. And so what we really recommend instructing students in general is just to say, just save everything to your U drive. It makes it a lot easier for old applications, but it also makes it easier to just tell the students, instead of say, hey, go to my documents, or save things to documents or downloads, or save things to desktop, just say, save stuff to your U drive. And because they're the same area, my documents and the U drive are the same link, it's just a lot easier. So for old applications, you could specify a drive. In this case, you would say the U drive, and things like that. And so it just makes it a lot easier for certain apps to save to a specific drive letter versus just selecting the documents folder. In some cases, there might be an error trying to save something if you select documents or desktop, because it'll think it's a network path. So we really recommend just instructing, use the U drive. The U drive is where you want to save things to, etc. And it has that same, or I guess it's disabled here in our demo, but it has that same backup previous version setup. So they'll be able to see old versions there. Okay, so that's file handling. Let me talk a little bit about the snapshots here. So what this is ultimately is each user is allowed up to 2 full snapshots. And what these snapshots are really doing are just covering a full backup of all of your files. So everything in documents, everything in desktop and downloads, all versions of everything, and that is persistent to the user is here in the snapshot. So when a student takes a snapshot, it essentially takes a full backup of their entire profile during that moment. And each user is allowed up to 2 of those, and so they could also restore from those snapshots. And ultimately what that is giving a student a fresh starting point. Let's say maybe they're working with multiple folders and multiple files, or they're using an application that's creating a huge folder and file structure. So it can help to take a full backup of that or have a starting point to go back to in case they go maybe a little too far, or they overwrite multiple folders or delete certain things. So instead of using the previous versions feature where they kind of click on certain folders and find previous versions, or let's say that the previous versions feature takes an hourly backup. So if they start something 2 minutes after the hour, they have to wait 58 minutes until that snapshot is automated. So it's a good way to take a snapshot right then and there. You have a good starting point. If they get too far, they could always restore, or maybe they could take a secondary snapshot if they get halfway. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Of course, they could also make certain copies of their stuff, but it's just a good feature to have. Okay, I'm going to talk about screen sharing now, and then we'll cover this messenger and some of the analytics things here. This is to enable or disable output audio from the virtual machine to your physical machine. So I'll talk a little bit about some of these other features here, like this network indicator for latency and things like that. Okay, so screen sharing, I'm going to cover that really fast. So screen sharing has 3 different modes, and all these features can be enabled or disabled per user or per class. So I'll cover that in a second. So feature settings like upload, download, copying things, snapshots or screen sharing or messenger, these are all features that could be toggled for certain classes. So if a faculty doesn't want their students to be able to share screens with each other or anyone, we could they could disable that for their class. If they don't want them to be able to copy and paste things or move files in and out of that classroom setting, these are all features that could be disabled or enabled for different classes. All right, so what this is, basically the screen sharing feature generates different links. And when a user receives one of these links, they will see the same screen that the student or user has in their virtual session. So if I click on view only and then copy link, and then I send that to Rudy or anybody else, even multiple people, and they don't have to be a user that exists in Apporto. It could be anybody, it could be a TA and so forth. So the receivers of this link, when they click on it, they'll see a tab that'll open up, and it will be a real-time view of the screen that this user is sending or sharing. In this case, view only just allows them to watch what's happening, but they can't interact with that environment. View and draw, what this does is it takes a screenshot of that virtual session and allows both parties to annotate in real time on that session, but it's just a single static image that they're annotating. And then full control, anybody who receives that link, when they click on it, will have full control, collaborative type of interaction with that virtual session that the user is running. And so all of these links, after clicked, will expire as soon as the student closes their web browser or ends screen sharing when they click here again and click the button to end that screen share. Okay, so it's important to note that those links do expire. They can't be used more than once, but it's a helpful way to, if a student needs help and they email a TA, for example, they could send them a screen share link, and maybe they can look at something together, or they could allow the TA to take control and kind of help them and walk them through. So it's a nice feature. And again, this is all stuff that could be enabled or disabled per class. And then we have the messenger here, and the messenger basically allows essentially it groups users into a class. So in this case, I'm a student who's a member of the Math 101 class, and here I could see everyone else who's in my class. Everyone's offline. I could see who else is a faculty and things like that. So this is a neat way. Looks like Rudy is online, and I could chat with another student. So the messenger is really neat. We can go into different modes here, like do not disturb or away. If I close the messenger, I will appear as offline. From here, I could initiate a direct screen share with Rudy, so I can enable control if I want Rudy to be able to remote control my session, or I can give Rudy a call, and the same goes for faculty who are online. So I can call Rudy. This asks me if you want to allow the access to the microphone. Rudy could have accepted that call, but he declined it. And so we have this voice over IP feature where you can have a direct chat with somebody vocally, which is nice. And so those are some of the features there with the messenger. So that's going to kind of move me into the presenter mode and virtual classroom feature. So I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and show you guys that. So let me move that to the side. Let me open up another browser session. Show you guys the faculty perspective. Okay, man, what is it with trackers today? Okay, so now I've got my faculty login. So on the left-hand side, I'm logged in as a student. On the right-hand side, I saw that Rudy sent me another message here, had a little 1 at the top here, which is kind of neat. So you can see if you have unread messages, Windows or whichever operating system you're using will also pop up a notification for you to let you know that you've got that you have a missed message. Okay. All right, so as faculty now, I have a few extra features here in my sidebar. So earlier I mentioned that you could, as faculty, disable or enable certain features. So in this case, my faculty role on the right-hand side has permissions for the Math 101 class. And so if I wanted to, I could disable some of these features for my class. So maybe I don't want my students to be able to screen share with each other or anyone. So I could turn that off. And that will disable that icon there for everybody. So that's how you could kind of modify or enable or disable certain features for your class. All right, so I'm going to go back to my App Store. I'll go ahead and launch the Windows desktop here. Okay, so I've logged in. As faculty, I have much of the same features, except this time I now have the virtual classroom button here and the presenter mode. So before I jump into those two, I did want to talk a little bit about this network meter here. So what this basically is a tool for students to be able to see what their latency is. And the latency is just a measurement of how long it takes for that student's computer to talk to our data centers. Now, all of our customers, we set up their environments in a data center that's nearest to them. So typically we should see a pretty low latency for folks. But if a student is reporting issues, this is one of those things that they could ask, or the faculty or support could ask them and say, "Hey, click on the little cell phone bar icon at the top right, and what do you see? What's your latency? What are you getting for that?" So this kind of is a real-time view of the latency and also the bandwidth utilization. And actually, That's a good point to make too, because we do get asked a lot, like what are the bandwidth requirements of accessing Apporto? They're actually really low. You could see the majority of my actions are hovering under a megabit of data. So unless I'm doing something highly graphical, like rotating 3D models and watching videos, we'll see that bandwidth utilization spike up, but it's intermittent spikes, and it's usually between maybe 3 to 15 megabits. Um, I've only seen it hit up to maybe 20 or 25 when we're seeing, a lot of screen updating. But ultimately, we're just updating pixels that are actually changing on the screen. So in this case, very few. And so that's why the bandwidth utilization is quite low. All right, so that's a good thing to cover there. Another thing I wanted to mention before I show you the faculty side of the virtual classroom and presenter mode is this gear icon here and the help menu there. So the gear icon here gives us a couple of settings, namely the screen resolution scaling. This is really important if you have a high resolution screen. So if you've got a Retina iMac or a Retina display MacBook, or maybe you've got one of the new like Dell XPSs or something like that, and you've got this 2.7K LCD display, or maybe you're running a 4K monitor. By default, your native operating system is going to set your scaling quite high. In most cases, if you have a 4K display, and unless you manually change that scaling, Windows or Mac OS is going to set that scaling to like 200% or maybe 250%, because it's going to assume that based on the size of your 4K display, text will just be simply too small for you to see. So it's going to give you the resolution, but scale things to look larger. And so our default setting within Apporto is that we'll match your local display scaling. So, but if you wanted to, maybe change that, you could do that. So if you wanted to enlarge things, you could do that. So you have a way to kind of change the resolution, if you will, um, within your virtual environment. So that's important to know, that if things appear too small or too large, you have an option to modify that. Typically, when you first connect to Apporto's virtual sessions, you'll get a pop-up from the browser asking if you allow clipboard functionality and things like that, or if you need to enable the microphone for any reason, like through the messenger here that we saw, voice calls and stuff like that. You could toggle those prompts again if they were missed, or you click disallow or something like that, so you can kind of bring those up. Another important piece here is we have in the help section, we have the video tutorials. So clicking there will take us to our site and take us to the resource center. And so the URL for that is apporto.com/help center with a dash, but if you don't put the dash in, we'll redirect you to the right space. And the help center is nice and a really good resource. These are essentially knowledge-based articles, tutorials, written guides, things like that. So video tutorials are really handy to have. They're split into two sections. First one is for students and the second one is for faculty. Lots of stuff here, video walkthroughs of what you need, using shared folders, which I'll cover in a second. Mounting a cloud drive, which I didn't cover, but I will in a moment as well, and using this feature virtual classroom, presenting to the students and things like that. And then below that are written guides for students and also for faculty as well. So lots of information here. There's screenshots and stuff like that. So really, really good resource. And if students really need help, this is a great place for them to click up there. They could go to that user guide, and then we also have support as well. So really important links here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go back to showing you guys the rest of the stuff. All right, so let me go ahead and push these to the side. Close that. Cloud Mounter. So a lot of folks ask us, we use OneDrive in our environment, we use Google Drive in our environment, or Box and Dropbox and things like that. How can students access those resources within the virtual PC? There's really two ways. One, the virtual desktop has browsers in it. So by default, we usually provide Chrome, sometimes Edge, and whatever else your sysadmins or whoever is kind of in charge of the Apporto service at your organization, whatever they want us to put on here or whatever they put on here. So, of course, they could open up Google Chrome and they can go to things like, OneDrive.com and access their files virtually through that web browser. So that's one way. Um, but using the Cloud Mounter is another good option. And what basically this is a proprietary tool that allows students to connect to any one of these drives or all four. Some organizations prefer us to remove certain items from here, so maybe you might see just one drive because that's all that you guys use on campus. But the point is, you can mount these cloud drives to your virtual desktop, and they'll show up as a drive letter here. So if I do OneDrive, for example, and I can have this reconnect. By default, this checkbox is checked. So if I leave that way, click connect now, it's going to bring up, our popular Microsoft login window. I can connect to that and then mount the drive. It'll show up as a drive O. And then from there, I'll see all of my folders and files that I have in my OneDrive. And so the same can be done for Google Drive and Box and Dropbox. You can have all four mounted at the same time. If I disconnect and reconnect at a later time, maybe 2 weeks from now, those same connections will reappear here each time you log in. So really, you only need to perform that process once. Okay, so those are mounted as a drive. And then from there, you can copy and move things around. You could work off of that. We recommend for large project files that you copy them from your cloud drive to the virtual desktop because there's some throttling of that communication, that there's like a network bottleneck in some cases. If there's a huge file, maybe it's 500 megabytes or maybe a couple gigabytes or something like that. So we recommend taking the larger chunk files and moving them to the virtual desktop, working with that file, with that application, and then saving it and then copying it back. That's the better way to do it. Okay. Okay, so on the right-hand side, I've got my faculty desktop. On the left-hand side, I've got my student desktop. And so basically what this is going to do, if I click on this button here, Virtual Classroom, it'll open up a new tab. And if I was teaching more than one class, I would see I would see an option that would say, which class do you want to view? In this case, my faculty role only has one class that I'm teaching. So Math 101 is my class, and here I can see a whole list of my students. In this case, most of them are absent. You can organize this view. Well, you could change it to different number of thumbnails here, of videos and screens. I could see the whole attendee list here. So I could see who's here, who's not. I can organize by attendance, or I can organize by alphanumerical or alphabetical order here. So it's kind of a neat feature. So here I can see updates to the screens. Usually these are about between 4 to 10 seconds, and which is enough to kind of give you a quick flash of what the students are up to. Now, if I wanted to take a closer look to see a real-time, actually, let me cover raising hands. So you could see that I raised my hand as a student, and I've got an outline of who's raised their hands. Now, my operating system would have also popped up a notification saying that you've got a hand raise. If the student falls into a different page, for example, that page number will pulse down here at the bottom, and you'll kind of have a visual feed, like a visual feedback that, hey, there's something going on page number 2, or somebody's raised their hand. You can acknowledge to the student that you've seen that they've raised their hand. So if you click on that handprint, the student will get a notification on their side saying that the faculty has acknowledged your hand raise. So there's a little bit of interaction there to show them, that you're aware that they have a question. And if you wanted to take a closer look at what the student is doing, for example, if I click on my student desktop here, we'll get a real-time video feed of what the student is up to. and you'll see that their cursors moving around and things like that. So we've got this, direct feed of what's going on. And then if you wanted to take remote control, you could do that as well. And then now you could take control of that screen. We could see what Rudy's doing and so forth. So if you can see that a student is maybe falling behind, or if they raise their hand and, you kind of need to watch what they're up to, you could do that. So you could initiate these direct screen type of shares and screen video feeds. And so if you need to take control of that screen, you could do that. The student will get a pop-up asking, do you allow them to remote control their session and things like that. And so it's a good way it's essentially taking what otherwise would be, or what used to be a physical lab where you would walk down, the rows of computers and kind of see what students are doing, and you can kind of help them out in real time. Yeah, so this is kind of the split view here. Let me jump out of that. Let's see. You guys have, oh, we have some questions. Okay, Juan has a good question. Actually, so we've done this before for quite a few universities. So we're HIPAA compliant, and we've got schools where we've set up a HIPAA compliant virtual environment where a lot of these features are disabled. For example, we've also introduced a watermarking feature that could be enabled, where there's a huge watermark that you could modify that basically shows up on the full desktop. You could choose its opacity and stuff like that. And so ultimately what we're doing is, you could make it such that data can't leave the environment by disabling these upload download features. Upon request, you would say, hey, we want our students to, or we want this particular class now to have outside internet access within the virtual environment. We want it fully isolated. Here's a data set that we want our students to work with, but we need to make sure that they can't download it. So, we could disable the internet, for example. We could prohibit launching web browsers, if you will, or we could just remove them, stuff like that. So there's ways that we can kind of secure the environment to work with, and we have done this before, to work with sensitive or confidential data. And so you kind of choose, how locked down you need it, and you can specify, how long it should exist for. So there's a bunch of features kind of set around that approach. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, sure thing. Yep, and so you can kind of set, in a way, almost like an expiration date to the environment. So yeah, it's really customizable, and it's just up to you guys, what type of data you're providing or you're working with, and how you want it to function. So that, any ideas that you have, hey, we want to make sure that this can't reach to the campus. You want to make sure it's isolated. Students can't see each other, stuff like that. So it's all different ways that we could lock it down. Okay, let me talk a little bit about our presenter mode. So the presenter mode is essentially, so as faculty, we've got, I've got my app store. I launched the Windows desktop. I've got my virtual desktop that I'm working on, and then I've also got my virtual classroom that I enabled. So presenter mode will be a presentation of this virtual desktop to the student screens. And so ultimately, in this case, if you're teaching more than one class, you can specify which class you want to present to. If you do want to broadcast vocally during your presentation, you could do that. And then basically what it does is it shares the screens to all of the students who are connected. And so what the students get is a pop-up, essentially asking them, how do you want to view this presentation that the faculty is sending? Do you want to view it in a different tab? That is the case that you would use, or you could use, if you had a second monitor, or you could view it in the same page if you are, if you've got a single monitor and you just want to follow along what the faculty is doing. And so that's kind of what we have, is a real-time view of everything that's going on the faculty screen. And if the student wanted to follow along, they could move the preview around. They could, minimize it if they want to, kind of tuck it out of the way for a moment. They could bring it back up. If they need to resize it, they could do that. Right, so I'm showing you kind of a split view, but you get the idea that you can resize it, you can move it around, you can get rid of it. If you close it here, then you can click that icon at the top there. For this is the student view, so they could click on that and they can choose again if they want to open it up within the same page or open it up in a different tab, kind of like picture in picture. That's what we've got here. So it's pretty neat, and it's a good way for students to kind of follow along what you're presenting, what you're showing them. So it's a neat way to see that. So that's kind of a wrap up on the virtual classroom and the presenter mode. Pretty neat features. I think in the upcoming release, we might have a checkbox, I think, coming where you can hide the absent folks here, but it's, we're still able to kind of organize the view. But yeah, so and a lot of this stuff, a lot of these features actually came by faculty request, right? We developed a bunch of them, but we heard from a lot of faculty, that told us, hey, it'd be really awesome if we could see what our students are doing in this virtual lab. So we created that. Another faculty asked us to create a list, attendance list of the whole roster, for the class. So we added that. And so a lot of these features that you see, the majority of them are just by customer request. So anytime you guys have any new features that you want, but we're lacking, really recommend, sending us an email, success@apporto.com, or support, just kind of like, hey, we really need to have this. We really do listen to customer requests quite a bit. So a lot of the stuff that you guys ask for makes it into the product. So it's really important to communicate with us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close some of these and talk a little bit about the faculty dashboard here. Okay, so I showed you guys the feature settings. The user screen is for you to see when you have the permissions to, either create a student that may be enrolled late in a class, so you could add them to your class. If they were like a late enrolled student, you could add them to your Math 101 class. The calendar is just a way for you to schedule synchronous sessions. So maybe you're going to instruct like 50 students to connect all at the same time. You could put that in a schedule calendar, and what that'll do on the infrastructure side is kind of prepare things 10 minutes before the class to make sure that everyone can connect right away. Otherwise, there might be a couple students who might have to wait 10 seconds to get a session. So what scheduling does is essentially spins everything up in the cloud and everyone gets to connect right away. All right, so the analytics is there's a faculty dashboard here. And what this does is kind of shows you the classes you're teaching and which application is specified for your class. In this case, I want to see some analytics for my Windows desktop. And ultimately, this just kind of loosely shows us total time spent or how active they were. We measure activity by mouse and keyboard input, right? So if a student launches a session like Arihant here, they might have connected, but they didn't do anything, right? So if you instruct a student to use an application specifically in Apporto, then if they're doing something, if they're active or not. So you could see some percentiles here. You could plot certain students and compare them against others. You could disable certain legends and things like that. So we can kind of see a little bit of feedback on how active students are. And we've had faculty in the past, especially in high schools, where they've emailed us and said, hey, I've been teaching this class and we've got this one student that is not doing too well. Can you send us a report of like all of their session lengths and when they logged in last and things like that. So, and we could do those upon request, those types of reports. Okay, let me go back. Oh, let me show you guys the Canvas piece really quickly. So we have a lot of LMS support, meaning that we can connect to Sakai, Moodle, Brightspace, like D2L, Canvas, Blackboard, Schoology. So those are the LMSs that we support. And let me really quickly show you guys what that looks like. Go ahead and log in with my student account. I'll just show Canvas really fast just because that's a really popular one. Log in as Jake. All right, Jake here is taking one class this semester. We've got the engineering class, and in this class, we've got some assignments that faculty has created for me in Canvas, and we've got other things like the syllabus and so forth. So if we go home, we could see some. Obviously, your guys' stuff would look a lot better because you would have put more things here. But ultimately, what I want to show you are two ways that Apporto could be integrated into the learning management system that you have. So if we click on App Store and click on that button, that's going to, so you saw I'm a student, I logged into Canvas, and boom, I've got my App Store here, and I see my applications that I have access to and so forth. Now, if your Math 101 class had a direct link to the virtual machine instead of the App Store, you could do that as well. So we click here, and that opens up a tab and goes straight into the same VM that you guys were looking at earlier. And so it's a pretty neat integration. And what's nice about the integration with how this is, you don't have to instruct your students to go to, myschool.apporto.com, log in with your email, etc. They can do all of that and be grouped into their class automatically through the Canvas or whichever LMS system that you guys have. So they authenticate once into the learning management system, and then from there they can launch the environment directly from their class. Another feature that we have right now specific to Canvas is assignment return. So we saw earlier that we have assignments here that faculty has created for me. In this case, there's 4 pieces of homework. In my virtual desktop as a student, I could open up Chrome, I could go to my Canvas portal and upload my assignment from there, or I can work on my SolidWorks project or my Photoshop project, download it to my physical machine, then go to my Canvas and upload it, or I could just click the submit assignment button here in Apporto, and this links back to those assignments that you've created in your shell in your course in Canvas. And so I could choose that homework assignment, select it, and then from here it's going to ask, okay, what file do you want to upload to that assignment? And then it'll go ahead and return that back into that assignment section here. And that goes back to you guys as faculty for your review. So it's a pretty cool feature. It's just a nice seamless way for everybody. If you were faculty and you were accessing your classes that you've got and you clicked on here and you logged in, you would be logged in as faculty. So we would see the role that you have in your LMS. We would see that you're faculty, and it will automatically go ahead and give you the faculty role. So you'll have the virtual classroom button and presenter button here automatically, and your messenger and so forth. So all of that is automated through the LMS integration. We really recommend it. It's just an easier way to make everything seamless. LMS these days is kind of like the self-service portal for everybody, for faculty, for students, especially students. And so it's just easier to instruct to them, hey, we've got this integration. We've assigned, the virtual desktop to your engineering class. Go ahead and access it that way. So it's a good and easy way to do that. Okay, gonna pause for a moment for questions, and In the meantime, I'll go ahead and start loading up our Cyberlab really quickly. All right, no questions. This is easy today. You guys don't have any questions? All right. Okay, I'm loading up the side here. So we're about to hit our hour mark, but really quickly, I want to show the Cyberlab environment. And so, one thing I wanted to point out, and I kind of mentioned it earlier at the start, is that we support multiple operating systems as well. So if you have a programming class that you might be teaching that is running off of Ubuntu, or you need to run CentOS or Red Hat, we support that. So you could have a virtual desktop that's Linux based or Mac based. And all those containerized profiles and redirected data like desktop and documents and all of that stuff, it spreads around all of those environments. So if I save something to my desktop in my Windows virtual desktop, I can find it in real time in my Linux environment as well, or my Mac desktop and things like that. So it's all like a seamless, cohesive platform. And then for computer science folks, we have a lot of stuff around that. So if you need students to access PowerShell or command prompt, or you need to have Visual Studio there, well, we support all of that. Or Jupyter Notebook environments and hosted environments like that, we also have that too. And then from a cybersecurity perspective or networking perspective or endpoint management perspective, we support all those types of labs as well. So if faculty wanted to teach, you know, uh, like SCCM application deployment or imaging and things like that, or exploit vulnerabilities and such, that's also supported. Okay, and really quickly, I'm gonna go ahead and show my screen here. Okay, and this is one of those environments where we support nested virtualization. So in this case, this is kind of going to cover a little bit about what computer science folks or network folks or info security folks will like. So we have this topology view. This is running on a Ubuntu virtual machine, and the backend infrastructure of this is using Docker and KVM. And so this is an environment, or one of these environments, where we can create a visual network. So in this case, we have a firewall, we have some cloud nets, we have a router, we have another interface, network interface. In this case, it's a Cisco ASA, but it could be anything else like MikroTik, or any type of VM for network devices. And then we've got actual VMs inside of this. And so what's neat about this is a modular lab, and it can be configured to have, for example, and here we have Kali Linux, so vulnerability exploits, right? So we can launch attacks. These are isolated environments. You have your endpoints, and so it's kind of an endless idea here that you can choose to, if you're teaching networking, you can customize this to do that. You could show packet flow. You could, we've got Wireshark here, all kinds of stuff. So, and what's neat about this environment is it's all running in the cloud. It's in the browser. So again, that makes it device agnostic. And each one of these VMs, you can customize those, right? So you can choose what type of endpoints you want here, how they can interact. You can choose, you could provide certain credentials and things like that. And these could be a template for certain students, right? So if you're teaching a class, each student would get their own isolated environment. You would, as faculty, be able to access it, or you would be able to back it up or restore it or wipe it for each semester and things like that. So it's pretty neat stuff. So a lot could be done with this. We also support Hyper-V as the hypervisor within the nested virtualized environment. So it's very similar to VMware Workstation. So but we really like this one a lot more because of this topology view. It gives the students feedback of how things are connected and how things interact. Within Hyper-V or VMware Workstation, it's more I guess theoretical in a way, so they don't have a visual aid like this. So this is a really cool way to show that. Okay, guys. Well, with that, we're at the hour. I wanted to thank everyone for jumping on and joining. As I mentioned earlier, this is a recorded session, and we'll be sending out the recording to this session a little bit later. And we have another session coming up on the 20th. And then after that, we're going to go back to our monthly cadence where we'll do this training every month, once a month. And so there'll be emails and links sent out with that information and registration links. So I'll go ahead and stop recording now.